My name is Rachel Dworkin from the Chemung County Historical Society. Today is June 19th, 2020, and I am here interviewing
Stephen Winston, Spanish teacher at Thomas A. Edison High School for Elmira Heights Central School District.
and this is for the COVID Memory Project. So we're mostly going to be talking about teaching with COVID. So how long have you been with the Elmira Heights School District?
This was my fourth year teaching, so it was 2016, fall of 2016.
Okay, but you've taught elsewhere.
Yeah, I started teaching in fall of 2009 at Elmira Free Academy, and then it's been a long history since then. But This is my fourth year at.
Okay. When did the school let you know that they were going to go digital as a result of the pandemic?
We had some conversations about it starting either Wednesday. On Friday the 13th, I hadn't talked to a lot of the staff, but my students were telling me that the staff was saying there was going to be a school closure. And then Saturday the 14th, the new superintendent put out the word that Monday was going to be our last day, Monday, March 16th was going to be our last day, that we were going to have a school closure. It would last at least until April 15th at that point in time. I was under the impression that it was only going to be until April 15th or maybe sometime in May. I thought we'd definitely be back at some point. But a lot of the teachers went in my district, in my school. A lot of teachers put in probably a full day of work between Saturday, March 14th and Sunday, figuring out what curriculum points need to be done, how much work needed to be delivered and administered, and how we could best support our students completely remotely, especially when we live in an area where some people have very spotty internet access, and some kids have very poor technology access.
So what kind of guidance and assistance did the school district provide you in terms of getting all of that ready?
The principal and the superintendent have been very communicative with the information that they do know. They have definitely support and offered a lot of assistance. They obviously didn't know a lot, and a lot of it's been up to the governor and the New York State Department of Education as to what we needed to do and what they needed to do. But we've had staff meetings every 1 or 2 weeks. All the committees have still been meeting via Zoom. And we've been trying to communicate with the staff and faculty have definitely been communicating a lot during the pandemic. I spend 3 to 5 hours a week on Zoom in meetings with staff.
Okay, so how much time do you spend with students? And how are you communicating with them, and how are you teaching your classes?
Well, it's been difficult. How am I communicating with my students? as a Spanish teacher, um, it's at the beginning of the closure, they wanted us to not teach any new content or new material. And March's focus, phase, to do whatever review we could that the students could already do. Practice skills that they already had. For example, I heard that the social studies teachers basically just took a whole bunch of Regents review material for the global history regents, photocopied up to like 70-page packets, and sent the kids home with that in order to prepare them for the Regents, which of course was eventually canceled and the students were exempted from.
So is that for all subjects? There are no So is that for all subjects? There are no Regencies this year?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
All of the Regents were canceled. All of the Regents exams were canceled. And Spanish is a bit weird because in spring of 2011, the New York State Board of Regents decided to cut funding for all foreign languages. So the Spanish 1 final exam and the Spanish 3 final exam used to have statewide exams made by the Board of Regents. But by spring of 2011, those were cut. The graduation requirements, however, still remained. A locally developed district-wide benchmark exam. I think either benchmark or checkpoint exam. Students still have to pass the Spanish 1 final exam grade in order to move on to Spanish 2 in 9th grade, if that's how the school is doing it, for the basic local Regents diploma. And the Spanish 3 final exam is a test that each student needs to pass in order to get the advanced designation, I think is the official term.
Okay. And were those tests canceled in addition to the Regents?
Yes. In fact, all tests were canceled for our district, at least, except for the accelerated college experience courses, the ones that are taught in our school through Corning Community College, and the students are earning college credit for. The idea is that the colleges move to remote learning, and there's an expectation that any student who's taking a college course, even as a high schooler, needs to work hard enough to acquire access and continue working, and needs to continue to be held accountable as if they were in a college course, because they are. So even though they're high school students, 16 depending on the school and the subject, the students needed to be held accountable.
Okay.
But what you may not know is that the New York State Department of Education, at least I believe it was their call, were not allowed to penalize students in any way, shape, or form, or lower their grade for any reason once the school closure started, unless they were in a college level course.
Oh.
So, as a Spanish, for the phase 1, I knew that I could have the students teach themselves new vocabulary. I have a very efficient and effective way of distributing new required vocabulary for the units, and I have a lot where the students can study them on their own. So basically, I said, you have 1 calendar month. Teach yourselves these 150 new words by using flashcards, basically. And any student who, even a student who had whatsoever, could take the packet that I handed them, either make flashcards on index cards or make flashcards on tiny scraps of paper that they made themselves, or use the lists of vocabulary that I gave them, cover up the English words, look at the Spanish that I gave them, cover up the English words, look at the Spanish words, and test themselves that way. And it was about 10 words a day, I think. If they learned 10 words a day every day for 30 days, every day for 30 days, or five words a day every day for 30 days, was 150 words, and that was all of the new vocabulary for the rest of the year. That's what I expected from my Spanish 2 and 3 students. When we found out that we weren't, we had to start phase 2. And as of phase 2, all of the teachers were required to create a team in Microsoft Teams to communicate with the students that way. For my Spanish 2 and 3 students, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors in high school, basically, I didn't expect them or need them really to communicate with me about their new vocabulary they were learning. Some teachers, had enough material that the students could handle and teach themselves. That they didn't need constant contact right away. But by mid-April, every teacher in our district or in our building at least, Thomas A. Edison High School, had a team in Microsoft Teams with all of the students in all of their classes invited to it, where we could publish assignments, post in the forums. We have a school-created email system. So we sent emails to students, and we started giving out assignments.
What do you do for the kids that don't have internet access so they can't be part of the Microsoft team?
I wasn't part of it, part of the distribution, but our school gave out laptops to kids.
Okay. But how does that work if they still don't have internet access? Did they also give out hotspots?
Spectrum had made available free internet, would set up free internet for any kids, for any grade school students who did not have internet access.
So did that count for high school?
I don't know how many students. Yeah, high school. Okay. For any K through 12 students who needed internet who needed high school. Okay. For any K through 12 students who needed internet access to be able to do their work. Spectrum offered to set up free internet for them.
Oh, nice.
I don't know how many people they did that for. But I think a lot of the kids in our district in particular, or at least their parents' phones, I think at bare minimum, every student in our district at least has a guardian who lives with them who has a smartphone that can connect to the internet, even if it's via data. So our school delivered hundreds computer lab time, or a lot of the teachers do Castle Learning and give assessments online. So we have 3 or 4 laptop carts that the teachers sign up for, and students to work on laptops.
Okay. So they distributed the laptops. Mm-hmm. You could get your students online. Mm-hmm. You had the Microsoft Teams. Mm-hmm. How was that working for you? And how was that working for them?
Well, there were definitely some frustrations. I am part of the technology committee in the district. And we spent 1 to 3 hours a week meeting and debating whether we should stick with what we have if we should switch to Google's education platform, or if we should sign up for Schoology, which is a website that has a lot of bells and whistles and a lot of functionality, but is also very expensive.
That's what the Elmira City School District uses.
Well, the Elmira City School District, last I knew, over $126 million budget.
Oh, wow.
Per year for the school. And every single school in the Elmira City School District, I believe, counts as a Title I school. So they have additional funding available to them for certain things. But being a much smaller district, we don't have that option as much. And Governor Cuomo has cut education funding recently, has been cutting education funding, and we've heard that he might be cutting education funding up to 20% for next year.
So, in terms of using Microsoft Teams or Google, are those options free, or did you pay for those?
Google has a free option where it lets you have limited functionality, and you can use effectively Word documents and Excel documents and PowerPoint documents and Google Slides, I think. And there's a version that's entirely free, and then there's a version that gets enhanced security upgrades and a little more functionality. Microsoft, however, in my experience, has licensing and subscription services for as much as it possibly can. I have found rather difficult to acquire a license for Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office on a personal device. On a personal device if you don't have access to it. Hundreds of dollars. I personally spent a significant amount of my time during this school closure troubleshooting for students who didn't have licenses to the desktop version of Microsoft Word. I've been teaching since 2009, and I have documents that were created in 2009 or while I was in undergrad or grad school that I still teach from. And some of those documents were saved in the Microsoft Word 97 to 2003 version .doc extension, and some students couldn't open those documents when I posted them in Microsoft Teams. They couldn't open Microsoft paid desktop version of Microsoft Word. So the capitalism and the profiteering off of education has been a frustration during the school closure, because not all of our students have access that Microsoft requires of them.
Okay. So how you said you were interacting with the students? Was that mostly through Microsoft Teams? Does that offer like FaceTime kind of services, or like how are you doing most of your communication?
I set up a chat through an app called GroupMe, which is a messaging app that has been around for a long time. And I heard from my students that the other ACE teachers, college level teachers, were using GroupMe for discussions. And I started the GroupMe chat that first week and pushed out assignments every couple of days, gave the kids assignments, gave the kids flexible deadlines for every assignment that we weren't specifically going to go over in virtual class. I held all of my classes via Zoom because in the technology committee, when we tried doing a video chat with Microsoft Teams, it froze a lot and hated it.
Okay.
The Microsoft Teams video conferencing feature was not up to par with what Zoom offers. Microsoft has certain things that they have made their focus, and video conferencing just isn't one of them.
Okay. So how often do you have your Zoom classes with your kids? And do you have different ones for the different grade levels? So how does that work?
So Spanish is a bit different because I have mixed grade levels for every single course. I have freshmen and sophomores in Spanish 2. I have sophomores and juniors in Spanish 3. I have one junior and 12 seniors and 12 seniors in my Spanish 4 college level course. But for my Spanish 4 kids, I started meeting with them via Zoom twice a week in April.
And how often do you normally have classes in person?
5 days a week for 46 minutes.
Okay.
But working remotely, especially when we thought we were going to open back up, and for a lot of the teachers and for a lot of the students, it wouldn't work as well. I know a lot of teachers had their daycare options taken from them. Of course, a lot of other people working still had their daycare option open to them, so a lot of teachers had their children with them during the day and couldn't teach. There's a health teacher and a social studies teacher in my building who have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they had to have their kids with them every day. So it was very hard for them it wouldn't have been feasible for them to keep their exact same schedule. Plus the health teacher is split between the middle school and the high school. And the expectations were different between the middle school and the high school, so the scheduling was different. And it became clear that we weren't going to be able to have school as normal. So we met 1 to 3 times a week. I met twice a week with my Spanish 4 kids starting out in April. And then for my Spanish 4 kids starting out in April. And then for my Spanish 2 and 3 students, I asked them to meet with me once a week, starting whenever we found out that we definitely weren't going to go back to school. Knowing that the final exams were canceled, and that the kids weren't going to be held accountable. And in fact, since the students could not be lowered from what they were when the school closed, there was much less pressure to teach to the final exam or get the kids to pass. None of the kids were going to suffer at all. And none of the kids were in danger of failing if they didn't learn enough. So a lot of our kids started working full-time jobs. I have 2 students who were working full-time at Subway, one who's working full-time at KFC, multiple students who are working at least 20 hours. At least 20 hours a week at Wegmans. I have some students who are the full-time daycare provider for their younger siblings, and it's actually practically unfeasible for all of my students to attend classes on their regular schedule, or sometimes no. And again, I was not allowed to penalize the kids in any way, shape, or form. I had students who just closure. Didn't answer any emails, didn't answer their phone calls, and didn't even think about doing their work at all.
So for next year, I mean, you can't penalize them this year. Their grades are what their grades are.
Right.
Are your kids and district kids going to be, because of, you know, the difficulties of teaching online and the difficulties of these kids having to be babysitters and work full time? Does the school have a plan for getting these kids caught up so that...
That is an excellent question. The basic answer is that we expect this school closure and the fact that distance learning doesn't work. And learning without any accountability whatsoever does not work, at least for a lot of kids. There are some kids who have high intrinsic motivation, and they will rise to any occasion, conquer any challenge that we reasonably put in front of them. But there were some kids who knew that they weren't going to be held accountable this year, so they just learned absolutely nothing. The most honest answer to your question is I think it depends on the kids individually. I know that I personally taught all of the vocabulary and made all of the vocabulary that the kids needed to know well enough for all the kids who did everything I asked them to do to have no negative impact, vocabulary-wise. As of the third Spanish position, 7 through 12. So as of next year, I will be the only high school Spanish teacher in our district. The middle school Spanish teacher may come up and teach 1 or 2 classes, presumably for the kids. But I will have any of the kids that I had this year who take Spanish next year and don't move to another school, I will have them. So I know exactly what they missed. I have records of what they did and did not do. And I can cater my own teaching to what did and did not happen this year. And I think the teachers are going to work very, very hard to meet the kids where they are, exactly where they are, and make where they are grow. It's a term called zone of proximal development. It's a term called zone of proximal development, where we're going to meet their learning where they are and give them the support and the challenges that they can handle, and then continually, gradually, or as gradually as we can manage while still making up for all the lost, instruction, continue to build them up. But it's going to be hard, and we actually expect that the regencies next year are going to be impacted by this, whether they make them exempt or whether they throw them out, or whether there's more flexibility, or a lot of times with poor regents exams or regents exams where kids test poorly on them, they'll curve the exams and they'll just change the grades. Personally, I've always thought that a test that needs simply a poorly designed assessment, and the assessment should actually test the teaching, not something different.
Okay. So is the school scheduled to reopen? Or is that still up in the air?
Us. It's up to the governor, the Department of Education, and it's up to our local officials countywide. We basically have option A, B, and C. Option A is we open completely like normal. Nobody really expects that. Option B is basically we open on time, but with certain restrictions. We're not exactly sure what they are, but we expect that when we do open the building and resume in-person teaching, that there will be a lot of specific restrictions and cleaning guidelines that we'll have to do and comply with. And then option C is basically we start remote teaching in September. And then potentially an option in September. And then potentially an option D that we haven't talked about but we fear might happen is kids just aren't held accountable and the state or county officials decide that kids don't need to learn.
Okay. To add about your COVID teaching experience.
I do.
Okay, hit me.
Well, firstly, it's been very difficult because I have been, quote unquote, as per normal. I have been required to continue teaching my same content. The test at the end has been removed, but I created the test anyway, so I want to see what that really did for me. But, kids are still kids. And there are various teaching techniques that aren't disciplinary actions that encourage the kids to do the right thing. Proximity, walking up to the students as like a visual cue, a nonverbal cue that they should be doing what they're supposed to be doing. Eye contact, reaching out, fostering the connection. It's just a lot harder remotely. And there are also things like when kids don't put their names on the work that they turn in. If I notice in a class and I can either flip through all the names of all the kids who've handed it in, or I can ask who might not have put their names on their packets, and I'm looking at the kids right in front of me. But during the school closure, I had multiple students who didn't put their name anywhere on a 20 name on it, didn't talk to anyone about it. And it could be any one of my 26 Spanish 3 students, or could have been any one of my 60 Spanish 2 students. And what's the point in me even figuring out whose it was? Not giving kids the credit for having done the work doesn't penalize them in any way, shape, or form, grade-wise or for next year.
So have you been bothering to grade their work at all?
We have been mandated to provide specific feedback to the kids.
Okay.
We have also been given a directive to stay as positive as possible. So as a Spanish teacher, it has been very difficult for me. I recognize the kids and I thank them for turning in the work. But when anyone is learning foreign language, there are a lot of little mistakes that could be made, in addition to a lot of big mistakes that could be made. In addition to not being able to penalize the kids for completely ignoring me during the entire school closure, and me having to document every single attempt of mine to engage them. I have a Microsoft Excel file of every single communication I have had with any student. It is several hundred rows long, but I was mandated to keep it to cover my bases. I can't penalize the kids for Google translating their entire work. and I splitting their entire work. And I had one student in particular that I know. I know what his ability is. I had him last year. I've had him since the beginning of the school year. I'm looking at this conversation, and I know that he doesn't know how to use the imperfect conversation. And I know that he doesn't know how to use the imperfect subjunctive tense. But it's on his paper. And I know the vocabulary that he has no reason to know what it is. And the complexity of the very simple practice speaking task assignment that I gave him for the final exam that was canceled. I know what he should have done, and I know what he got me, and he definitely just typed it in English, put it in Google Translate, wrote down whatever he saw. I'm not allowed to penalize the kids either for that, or for copying each other's homework. I can penalize the kids for that if they just, one kid wrote their homework out, took a picture of it, and sent it to their friends. And teaching remotely, it's a lot harder to call or to bring it up with them, especially in a professional, emotionally sensitive way. There's also a website that has all the answers to all of the workbook that goes along with my textbook on there, and that was 2 and 3 students. Or even if it doesn't have all of the answers, it has a lot of the answers. And multiple students copy and pasted entire paragraphs word for word. 32 word paragraphs. 4 students have the exact same thing. And it was an open-ended prompt about your favorite dessert. And 4 kids had the exact same 32 words in a row.
Yeah.
And I can't penalize them in any way. I'm supposed to just not give them credit for that assignment, even after I take the time to read it, connect it in my head which kids it was, so that I know for next year, which is going to be the only time that matters if they take Spanish next year, which they might not. In which case, what's the point of even giving them any penalty if this is their last experience with Spanish? Does me reprimanding them for not doing should that be their last experience with a foreign language? No. My only potential recourse would be to individually call their parents, defend how I know that their students cheated, and express my disappointment and sorrow without lowering their grade at all. But supportive, not supportive. And I honestly don't want to unnecessarily burden any parents with that during this time of uncertainty. I don't know what all the parents are going through. I don't know what all the kids are going through. I know one going through. I know one of my students just had the paperwork finalized with getting his half-brother adopted. So we had a nice conversation about that and how excited he is to have done that, and found out via Zoom that he could officially call this person who's been living with them his brother from now on. That's really exciting. But he also told me that he found out via Zoom, but told me he couldn't come to any of my Zoom classes because his Zoom had been acting up, and he couldn't figure out how to use Zoom. So the dichotomy has been difficult. And even when we do Zoom, so I have 26 Spanish 3 students, and I've been meeting with them once a week for an hour, which I think is a small ask compared to 46 minutes a day, 5 times a week. 26 on the Zoom calls. And just like that, I can't penalize kids or hold kids accountable for just completely ignoring me. I can't make the kids keep their video on. I can't make the kids keep their audio on. In classes that I spent teaching, there were only 1 or 2 or 3 people with their video on. I have spent a few of my Zoom classes talking to my computer, a bunch of black screens with white names on them. And sometimes when I ask specific kids specific questions, there'd be a 3, 4, 5, 6 second delay before they unmuted themselves and answered me. Second delay before they unmuted themselves and answered me. So what does that mean? You know, when I'm on a staff meeting and I unmute myself, I hit Alt-A, I chime in, I hit Alt-A again, and I participate. But if a kid spends 6 seconds to unmute themselves and then talk, does that mean that they're watching Netflix while having my class and they pause the volume? They had to go find their remote, pause the volume, then find the unmute button, and then say the answer? You know, I had no recourse in saying, I want everybody to keep their volume on all the time. I want everybody to keep their audio on all the time. One, because I couldn't guarantee that all the kids had quiet environments to teach from. You know, some of my kids were Zooming from their dining room, or some of my kids had dogs. You know, some of my kids were Zooming from their dining room, or some of my kids had dogs or toddlers in their house who would make noise, so they kept their volume muted for that, or construction right outside. And I couldn't make the kids interact. I couldn't make the kids interact with me. And I felt personally that asking kids who, high schools in particular, are very concerned about their hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed a lot of the kids just didn't want to turn their video on, presumably because they didn't want the other kids to see how they looked and how they hadn't done their hair or their makeup, or noticed they actually hadn't changed their clothes in 3 days because they have multiple classes with them. You know, and I think a lot of people, adults even, who are working from home are getting away with that because you can, and like, what's the point? Or sometimes. So, you know, I didn't want to, they were neglecting their hygiene a little bit, or that was the worst their hygiene was. But then again, I couldn't get any energy from them. You know, I've always loved my job, and I've always loved teaching. I stay up late and I get connections I can make with them. But talking to a black screen with white names on it, is not the same at all. It's not even a placebo. It's just myself.
Okay. Anything else to add on that note?
I've had a really hard time during closure because it's been very demoralizing. You know, I feel like I haven't been able, or I'm mandated to do my job. There's no accountability at all. You know, and we tried very hard not to let the students know that we weren't allowed to lower their grades at all whatsoever. But I had one student who had a perfect 100 average in my Spanish 3 class. And she's very high strung. And she point blank asked me, I'm not going to take Spanish 4 next year. Work. And we're not supposed to lie to the students. So I basically had to tell her, well, I'm not allowed to lower your grade. So you have 100. So you can be done with my class and focus on your other classes. and it and it's especially hard. It's hard enough when kids who you expect to fail or kids who you expect to get by are like, whatever, I don't care about your class. But when the most dedicated students who are most concerned about their average are like, I don't want to do any more work for you because I don't have to. That's especially hard. And then I also had a parent who emailed my principal because she didn't like how I was communicating to the kids or how I was expressing my disappointment that so few of the kids had done stuff, had gone onto a website and played flashcard games. She thought that was too much of an ask for me, so she emailed my supervisor. And he was very supportive, and he basically said, yeah, there's no reason for this. She's out of line, but cover yourself. Stop communicating with the parents as much. It only takes one parent who's just too high strung or having a bad day to really make an impact on a teacher for the rest of their career. So that's hard too. Overall, it's been really hard, and it doesn't really work, and it's not a long-term plan. And I think that this closure and the complete lack of accountability being mandated, and not leaving any professional discretion up to the teachers, is going to define this generation of kids. And for the teachers who are going to have those exact same kids next year in my position, it'll be fine. But I'm really worried, 5-10 years from now, when I get kids who are in elementary school and didn't learn anything or stopped learning how to count because they weren't made to.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your personal situation in COVID. So you mentioned that you've got coworkers with small children.
She's 21 months old. Her name is Nora. She is wonderful. She has been a light in the darkness, a sustaining force in these uncertain times. I'm very lucky that my mother-in-law runs the day as per normal, so that my wife and I have been able to work as best we can from home or go into the office when we need to. I've needed to go into school to print things a few times. So I've been lucky in that regard. That I have a lot of support from the people around me that helped.
So you've got your mother-in-law, you've got your wife, you've got your daughter. Have you been in touch with anyone else really? Like, have you been in touch with anyone else really? Like,
physically, we haven't had anyone that's not in my household or or my mother-in-law and sister-in-law who lived together, and my daughter goes to daycare with my mother-in-law every day. Those are the only people who have been in my house until today. My mother-in-law and my sister-in-law, because they live together, and Nora basically lives with them during the day. I haven't seen my mother in person since this started, and she's been fighting pneumonia since effectively January, off and on. I haven't seen should they get a disease that so seriously attacks lungs and heavily affects diabetics. My aunt and uncle are both fighting cancer right now. Michael is at Michael is at stage 4. I just found out. We haven't seen them. And so I've been dealing with a lot of personal stuff, family wise. That's been really hard. For me to keep a professional happy face on for my students when I'm dealing with so much outside. Especially when I've always, as a teacher, gotten my energy from the kids. Very little of that positive, encouraging feedback the way this has been set up. Some of my students have definitely been great. I've had some great spots and times. The school community has definitely worked hard to try and make it better. As encouraging.
So, you haven't seen your relatives, but you've been in touch with them.
I mean, I'm really happy that we have the internet because it makes it easy for people who want to stay connected to stay connected. We've done video chats with. We've sent. We have messenger groups where we group chat with each other. We've had Zoom game nights where we play with my wife's aunt and her son, who live out on Long Island and are in quite a hot spot in the pandemic, and my wife's uncle who's actually down in Florida. So we meet via Zoom with them, and we've stayed connected over the internet, which is great. And I wish everyone would be better at staying connected and communicative. With other people.
Okay. What are you guys doing other than, staying in contact with friends and relatives to stay sane during this?
I mean, as far as the isolation, it hasn't been quite as hard for us, because my wife and I have each other, and we have our daughter, and in particular because our daughter has to, times even, she's been there pretty much every day, and which also means that we see my sister-in-law all the time. We basically hang out, the 5 of us, most of the time anyway. So in the beginning, it really wasn't that much different. We just stopped going out to eat and stopped going shopping. I didn't really care. But as time wore on, it's gotten more strenuous. And it's certainly been harder. And it's become more real and more disheartening. But then there's also everything else that's going on in the people like us who care about people in general and want people to be safe and healthy and well and alive. There've been a lot of people dying and a lot of people unwell, and a lot of people who are struggling.
Or anything we haven't talked about that you think we should have?
I think I've covered everything. I feel personally very lucky to have the support of me in my isolation group. I know there are a lot of people who are completely by themselves, and that's got to be hard. I am at least really glad that this time of the pandemic we have the technology that we have. In the pandemic in 1918, they didn't have the internet to talk to people, or entertainment. I'm really glad for Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and being able to watch movies from our couch. Because I don't know how I would entertain myself in isolation without the internet. So I'm really glad that we have the ability to use that for entertainment and for physical distancing from people, because people who want to be social can virtually.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to me.